Chapter 9. The school term was drawing to a close, and I found it difficult to make a decision on when to take sick leave. I knew that Julia was happy with the support she was getting, and I didn't want to start leave too early in case I would need the time further down the track. On the 29th of March, the decision was made for me. Julia, Katrina and I visited the surgeon. He was elated, a moment of joy in his job. Julia was in, and the success rate for the trial was 80%. It would involve living in Sydney for at least 6 months. She wasn't very responsive, slightly stunned, and the surgeon pointed out that it would be hard, but it was a rare opportunity. She agreed, but I did not understand her reluctance at the time. Maybe a full realisation of her position. There was some further testing to be done so that Sydney would be armed with the information they needed. I organised my sick leave and would have enough to see me through for 3 months. Easter was drawing nearer and I did my final week at work. My sister Jane came to visit from Alice Springs. Julia was pleased to see her. There had been many connections over the years. I was concerned about the accommodation we would need in Sydney, and Jane made inquiries and rang a friend from our old school days who lived in Sydney. A connection with someone who had lived through the cancer of her son. A wonderful colleague bought me a TomTom satellite navigation system for my car, knowing how much I dreaded the idea of driving in Sydney. But things were still unresolved. Easter arrived and brought with it my sister, Auntie Katrina, and her children, all close to my daughters in age and connection, and my brother Liam as well. I cooked a dinner at my house and, true to tradition, gave Julia the shank from the Lebanese lamb. She said it was the best ever yet. And we had a grand night, and her sisters entertained us with a song or two and plenty of dancing. The sort of night she always enjoyed. Jimmy came at the end to drive her home, having declined the invitation to join the family. My family was a little disappointed at the loss of an opportunity to meet him, to welcome him in. We all went to her house the next day, but Jimmy remained well in the background, unwilling to step forth and make himself known. We were waiting for the date for her first appointment in Sydney and were frustrated by the time it took. I had imagined myself packing the car and heading off. I had planned exactly what we would take. Enough bedding to survive on a bare floor if necessary, linen to accommodate any visitors, cooking equipment and crockery, a sewing kit, my sharp knife, cooking herbs, and my paints and brushes, all to be packed into my small car. The plan was to look for an unfurnished flat, and I started making inquiries online. Finally, the date came through, and we were surprised to learn that we had to wait until the 19th of April, which was a week off. We were anxious that the clock was ticking, 5 weeks already used up since her death sentence. 2 new melanomas had appeared on her back, and they were causing her a lot of discomfort, making it difficult to sleep, and there was pain below the knee on her right leg. Her father was impatient and heard of a trial in Brisbane and made inquiries, only to learn that they were trialling a different drug and that there was a long queue of patients, all equally desperate to find a cure. My brother Liam suggested I join him and his family in a lighthouse keeper's house, which they were staying in for a week as part of their volunteer work preserving the vegetation of a national park. Julia was invited also, but in the end she decided she wanted the time with her friends, and there were the healer's visits. It was a good time to gather my thoughts, surrounded by nature and the rhythm of the sea. My brother and I sat one night in the little window-lined hut underneath the lighthouse beam and watched it scan the clear night sky, full of the awe of it and hope. Julia had her week booked with social engagements, and I felt that it would be a good time for her to slow down a little and spend some time alone. But she wasn't ready for that yet. The healers were taking up a large part of her waking hours, which Jimmy resented because he liked to keep her for himself. We were all a little reluctant to visit her in her basement room, aware that we might be intruding on her privacy. In fact, her sisters complained that they found it hard to get an audience with her. The time in Sydney would allow her some time for reflection. Jimmy was not joining Julia and I. He was to remain behind, with the assumption that he would have some time to organise himself to Sydney. The girls all came for dinner one evening, time together as a family before departure. I had dug Natalie out of the security of my wardrobe and tucked her into the blue sheets on the spare bed, anticipating that she would be needed. "Where's Natalie?" was her first statement as she came through the door, her first inquiry of her comforter since her journey had begun. A stuffed toy, grubby and worn, providing the security that was needed, as it always had. Ella packed her bags in preparation for moving into her sister's house that afforded much better access to the train station and work. She would have the inconvenience of leaving her study desk behind, but she would have the company of the household during my absence. I had considered renting out my house in the hopes of boosting the finances, but there was far too much organisation and not enough time to secure a home for rental. I would pay for Ella's board instead, as well as my mortgage. Julia would have to continue paying rent and her share of the household bills, as Jimmy had no income at all. He was still driving the rental car that needed fuel, had to be fed, and of course there was the expense of his mobile phone. He smoked cigarettes and had an occasional bottle of red wine, all supplied by Julia. There was his entertainment and the continuous supply of videos. The household included him in any meals they prepared, but he was never moved to respond with the assistance of some housework, accepting it all as his due. But Julia was able to justify his actions because he was still trying to start the business, only a matter of time until he could pull his own weight. My girls were concerned that I would find the drive too arduous, but I needed the car in Sydney and it was packed to the gunwales. Driving in unfamiliar city traffic is not a chore I face with confidence. Emma is a confident and competent driver, having handled vehicles in all parts of the world, and so it was decided that Emma would share the drive. We would break the journey overnight. Julia was not well, the melanomas on her back causing real discomfort, and her right leg was beginning to hurt, enough to cause her to limp. I booked her on a flight that we would be able to meet in Sydney in time for Emma to make a return flight ready for work the following day. There was a phone call from a member of my parish, a woman I had known since my children were babies, not closely connected except by our faith. She had started a prayer chain that stretched out into a network of unknown faces and places, but they needed guidance on what they should pray for. I had been given the address of the charity house near the hospital, run by the church, for anyone in need of a bed while attending the hospital. They were busy, but we had a couple of nights there, intermittently combined with a couple of nights at a cheap motel. But after that, it was all unknown. "A roof over our heads," was my reply.